Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for the webinar. We're very happy to have both Ed Beshara and Sonia Clark join us as we talk about EB-5 and what the RIA has done for EB-5. And I'd first like to go ahead and introduce Ed Beshara, who, your career in just immigration is just so impressive, Ed. And I was thinking about it. I've known you for 10 years, which seems like a very long time, but you've known FPP for even longer than that. You're the managing attorney for Beshara, a global migration law firm. You've held leadership positions in AILA, the IUSA, different business organizations, and you're consistently voted among the top 25 immigration attorneys in the country. It's just such a pleasure to have you here. And Sonia Clark, you're the regional director for FPP. It's been such a pleasure working with you here. You have just many years of experience in the migration world. I think it's like over 13 years you've worked with different attaches, different embassies, and you know just immigration very well. And really, from the South African perspective, I think it's just a huge advantage to have you there, so you can really talk to us and so that we can understand investor needs, right? And so it's a pleasure to have you both here, Ed. Thank you again. If you want to give any opening remarks, but I can't believe it's been 10 years since I've actually known you.
Well, it's been a long time, Manuel, and I've known you and Sonia for a period of time that seems like yesterday. But I remember the first time I met Bob Kraft, who's the owner of FPP, and it was in Orlando, in fact, in about 2007, 2008. And this is where a lot of the people that became very much involved in the EB-5 Regional Center program met each other for the first time. So it seems like yesterday, but here we are today.
Yes, exactly. And so I'll go ahead and just get started really quickly. My name is Manuel Ortiz. I'm the VP of Business Global Development for First Pathway Partners. To give a little bit of background on FPP, Ed, like you mentioned, we were founded by Bob Kraft back in 2008. If people think about the EB-5 program and just what it is a program that was founded by the U.S. government back in 1990.
Yes.
But
yes.
it didn't really get popular until about the time that we met you in 2008, 2009 during the global crisis.
Yes. Well, we were giving lectures on EB-5 back in 91, 92. We were traveling through, for example, the UK, giving EB-5 presentations in London, major cities right up to Edinburgh. And we're doing other cities as well. But I think that very quickly, the reason why it became very popular was that the Canadian investment program closed. The Chinese investors at that time were looking for a place to obtain residency. We had a little bit of a recession, so developers were wanting not just to obtain traditional funding, but they also could now include EB-5 funding. And the Chinese investors were ready to move forward. And at that time, of course, obtaining US conditional residency was in a matter of months rather than the long periods of time we have now. So it became very popular back in those days.
And the big advantage to it was that what EB-5 allows is for the applicant at an investment now of $800,000 to obtain permanent residency along with their spouse and any unmarried children under the age of 21. And I think what was also very interesting about 2008, 2009 is that there was a global financial crisis. And typically when the credit markets freeze, right, EB-5 usually does well. But that was the first time that you actually saw that phenomenon happening. Obviously, right now we're in a high interest rate environment as well, and you're starting to see that as well, right? And so
right.
I think that's you have both the immigration aspect of it, how it's beneficial for the families, but also the U.S. economic benefit in terms of job creation and everything else. And right?
Yeah, exactly, Emmanuel. And the U.S. economic climate today becomes now very attractive for the foreign national investor to start investing in the U.S.
And Ed, let me ask you, in terms of the immigration process for investors that would like to take a look at this, what does that look like? I know there's a bunch of terms that people who are listening to us for the first time might not get, but you have the I-526, you have the 829, you have RFEs, and you have different processing times for investors that came in prior to the RIA. Maybe if you could walk us a little through that process.
Yeah, and I, of course, I would need Sonia to help and jump in, because I know that Sonia has a lot of potential and existing investors who are very interested in the whole picture. But right now, if we look at the RIA, the Reform Integrity Act of 2022, March, let's look at the advantages. The advantages are, number one, that a foreign national, they're thinking about relocating to the US with themselves, their family. And if they are already in the US in a non-immigrant status, based upon the new law, that if they're already here as a non-immigrant, could be as a student, could be as a visitor, could be in another temporary work category, now when they file their EB-5 investment, at the same time, concurrently, they could file their applications, investor, spouse, and minor children, for their conditional residency, apply for work authorization, apply for permission to travel. At the same time, they're filing their petition. And this includes everyone that is investing now. It includes everyone, including Chinese and Indian nationals, who normally face long periods of time before they could do so. But because of the new set-aside provisions in the visa bulletin that spelled out, they can apply today, everyone. That's a huge advantage, huge. Also, the huge advantage for EB-5 regional center investments is that when you compare the cost, and I've been doing business immigration in the United States now for 40 years, 40 years. I've been a professor of business immigration law at the University of Florida Law School. And again, as you know, we've represented many foreign nationals. We've been president of different chambers of commerce, international chambers of commerce, Australia, Britain, Brazil, etc. And when I see what the foreign national wants to do, invest in the United States for a number of reasons, but also to be able to live here with themselves, their spouse, and children, and you look at the cost comparisons of the other visas, intracompany transfers, investor visas, and compare the cost of investing in an EB-5 regional center project, hands down, without question, that the least expensive way of obtaining residency and the least cumbersome, the less worrisome, is the investor investing in an EB-5 regional center project. There's a set amount, admin fee, attorney's fee, that's it. But of course, the due diligence is picking out the right project from a investment, business viability standpoint, and an immigration standpoint to obtain the goal of getting residency.
Right. No, you're exactly right. I think for the project to be a successful EB-5 project, it has to be strong fundamentally on the immigration side and also on the investment side. One dictates your permanent residency, the other dictates whether you're going to get your capital back. But I would also go back to Sonia as well. You're in South Africa, and Ed, you have a lot of experience there as well.
Sure.
But Sonia,
Yeah.
what are you seeing as some of the motivations of why a South African investor would look at EB-5? I think one of the things that you and I talk about really on a weekly basis and sometimes on a daily basis is that this year has been a lot busier for South Africa than what we've seen in many, many years. And maybe if you could talk a little bit about the motivations behind why that's changing now.
Absolutely. Manuel, thank you. And good afternoon or good evening to everybody. The motivations, I think, this year has been a number of things. I mean, number one, we've seen a huge uptake of families, that have got children in high school and looking at universities. I think that's a majority of our investors or our clients that we're talking to. The other aspect, we've got our national elections coming up next year. And, it is a big worry, in terms of the future, safety and security for families. So not just from a political aspect, but also from an economic aspect. So, as you know, we've got challenges such as load shedding, which is electricity demand, and it's very difficult for businesses to prosper. So I think in terms of business people, they are looking at bigger markets like the United States, to grow their business, because at the end of the day, if you're a manufacturer, it's going to be very challenging for you to meet the demands, especially if you're in the export market, and then the other challenges, again, which impact hugely also on businesses, is the decline in infrastructure and also on our rail and our ports. So that is also hindering business people. And I think in terms of being in a first world country like the United States, any business person can just see you've got X amount of consumers. It's the opportunities are endless. So yes, from an education standpoint, an economic standpoint, and then also those investors that aren't ready right now, but are on the brink of actually going, also hedging your rand against the dollar, because as you know, anything that happens in the country, the rand will then depreciate against the US dollar, and it's extremely volatile. So putting your funds into, let's say, for instance, the United States and into an EB-5 investment, that money's safe, and you've hedged it against the volatile rand. And then we've got some investors, clients, that want to basically join their family and friends in the United States. Like Manuel, you said earlier, around 2008 and so on, there was a huge uptake in EB-5. But I think right now where we're sitting, I think this is the busiest EB-5 has been in the history in South Africa. So I think it's really important. And that's why we're having this today, for everyone we're talking to and been engaging with, to understand that there are protections. That's Ed's going to be talking a little bit about that. There's the industry is a lot more regulated than it used to be, and people are saying, well, how safe are my funds going to be? And that's the question. So that's all that we're going to be addressing today. And thank you very much, Ed and Manuel. I think that's it from me on that point.
Yes, thank you. Yes, definitely. Manuel?
I was going to say, yeah, those are really good points. And also, Ed, one of the things that I was surprised about, where you're located in South Florida, there's a big community of South Africans that migrate to South Florida, and being there really quite a bit this last year, that was something that was new to me. And their motivations are just what Sonia said. In some cases, students that want to go study there on F1s. Right now, with the changes of the RIA, there's a bigger advantage for F1s. There's also for the H1Bs. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about how we got to the RIA, because a lot of people focus on the investment amount, that it went up from 500,000 to 800,000. But if you think about it, it was not adjusted for inflation at all, ever. And if you just adjust it for inflation, the number should actually be at about $1.1 million. And so, while the focus is really on that, the investment amount changed, I think it's important to consider that aspect of it. But there are so many other good things and protections for investors with the RIA that maybe if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, it went from 500,000 in a target employment area of high unemployment rule. And then if it wasn't, well, then it was $1 million. In 2019, it jumped to $800,000, right? And then it jumped to 1.8 million, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a jump back in 2019. No one really liked it. The increase in dollar amounts were challenged successfully. And then, of course, when it was challenged, and then the amounts went back to 500,000 and $1 million, then the EB-5 program lapsed for a certain period of time because Congress was trying to see what they could do to improve the EB-5 program. So back in March of 2022, the RIA, the new EB-5 law, came into effect, and it increased the minimum amount to 800,000 or 1,050,000, depending on the location, depending on whether it was a rural area, depending on whether it was an infrastructure area or area of high unemployment. But we have, for example, if we're looking at any foreign national group, whether South Africans or Australians, and came from Australia, and we had a lot of South Africans migrating to Australia. But a lot of South Africans, as you said, Manuel and Sonia, are migrating to the US, whether it's Florida, whether it's anywhere in the US. But no matter where the South African or the foreign national wants to live, they can still invest in your program, an EB-5 Regional Center program. They don't have to live in that location. So if the business and the EB-5 project is viable, sound from an immigration standpoint, from a business standpoint, that's great. They can still come to the US and invest in that program, even if they want to live in a different location. The RIA is a wonderful, wonderful act. because it protects investors. Because when you look at what the Act states, reform integrity, the integrity of the investor is paramount. So that means that there has to be disclosure to the investor of who are all the people involved in the EB-5 Regional Center project. The credibility of the people involved is paramount, is very important. The people who are marketing the program, the people who are finding the investors will know, right? And they know because the law requires the USCIS to find this out as well, because they want to make sure that the credibility of the people involved in the project is sound. You know, the investors are not going to be taken advantage of. And that's why we have all these different forms that need to be filed with the USCIS, right? The investor is going to realize that one of the legal requirements based upon the new law is that each EB-5 regional center will have to file first the set of project documentation with immigration. It's on a particular form, and 956F. We won't go into all the technical details, but that form itself will present to USCIS all the offering documents, what was told to the investors, the business plan, the economic report, how the money is going to be used, how it's going to be used to create jobs, which is a legal requirement. So all these documents are going to be presented first to immigration. Once we get a receipt notice from immigration, or 10 days has passed, then at that point in time, can the regional center accept the investors? So again, this due diligence, this on the part of immigration, wanting to know what this project is all about, and that form needs to be approved first before any of the investors' petitions can be approved, right? Because the project documentation is important. Besides the investors showing the authentication of where they got the investment funds from.
And I think you bring up some really good points too, Ed, because I think in the word integrity, right, there are protections in the Act as well that ensure that investor funds are being used for their intended purpose as well.
Yes. And I think that it goes back, and I know that Sonia definitely wants to comment on this. You know, when we have been dealing with, you know, thousands of our clients who have been investors, and also on the other side, we create regional centers, we create EB-5 projects, right, as an immigration council in EB-5. We've done that. One of the things that, you know, the investors have to realize is that technically their investment's at risk when they invest in an EB-5 program. But at the same time, even though the legal requirement is that they have to make an investment at risk, they can minimize that risk by making sure their investment goes into a credible, viable, compliant EB-5 regional center project, right? But also, because we've handled many people coming into the US from all over the world, one of the things that we don't want to do is not take a personal interest in who these investors are. And that comes not just from the Immigration Council, but that comes from the EB-5 Regional Center project. We want to make sure that the transition in bringing themselves and the family is smooth, not worrisome.
Absolutely.
Making sure that they are looked after. And a lot of times we see that there are people in the United States, whether they're lawyers, agents, you know, business people, that have tunnel vision. If someone wants to come in from another country, they want to set up a corporation, or they want to file a tax return, they only think of what the client is asking for. They don't think that it involves many other disciplines. So if a client comes to us or you, FPP, they say, we want to relocate to the US, then the secret is it's a holistic approach. We bring in a team of professionals to look after that investor: immigration attorney, corporate lawyers, international tax accountants, real estate attorneys, right? Investment advisors, right? FPP will have your staff, Manuel, Sonia, to be able to advise them accordingly, because it's not just a tunnel vision approach, it's a holistic approach. So let's say, for example, if someone wants to come in and invest $800,000 in the EB-5 program that FPP is offering. And very quickly, and then Sonia, if you want to elaborate, but very quickly, when people say, oh, we can go to other countries and we can buy real estate in other countries and get residency or citizenship, can we do that in the US? Most people say no. I say, yes, you can. You can buy real estate in the US, and that could be your first step towards making an investment in an EB-5 program. The reason being is that they want to protect their wealth. And one way of protecting their wealth is that when the money is coming in from their own country, they can, as an example, buy real estate in the US, whether it's residential or commercial. They put cash into this real estate. They can also go to a mortgage broker, take the cash out, and then that mortgage amount, put it into the EB-5 program. So now they've bought real estate, residential or commercial, that's grown in value. The commercial that they invested in can receive rental income, for example, could pay off the mortgage. So now they've got this growth and high interest rate growth in an asset. They could go to a bank in the US and say, we want to buy treasuries. We want to buy money market accounts, bonds. The banks will say, fine, the interest rate could be very high. And now they say, well, we want to borrow against these assets. We put $2 or $3 million into these assets. The banks will say, sure, here's the borrowed money. They use the borrowed money to put into an EB-5 investment program. So now they're protecting their wealth as well. Besides making the choice that they can invest directly into the EB-5 FPP program, they also can make a choice that they want to invest in assets first, borrow against those assets, then put it into FPP. They can do it either way, right? So it's a hedge, as Sonia said, against the fact that they're putting money into an EB-5 program that could take several years before there could be a return of capital. But in the meantime, there could be a return on their investment immediately by investing in bank wealth management products as well as real estate. So this is something that today, because of the economy the way it is, high interest rates, it's a wonderful opportunity for foreign nationals to put money into the US economy right now. Wonderful opportunity.
That is such a great point, Ed. Yeah, so sorry, Manuel. So, I just want to reiterate, instead of taking your funds and putting it straight into EB-5, rather than just to simplify it, rather than just putting it into either a commercial enterprise or into real estate and then basically loaning against it. And then at the same time, your investment is growing or your commercial enterprise is then also growing. And at the end of the day, you're eligible for your funds returned after a certain period. So it's almost like hedging against it and safeguarding your funds by taking that first step.
Right. And also, Sonia, don't forget, if someone wants to buy a home in the US to live in, they can buy the home, they pay cash for the home, then they can go to a mortgage company, take money from the amount they put in their own home to live in the US and use that money again to, of course, to invest in the EB-5 program.
Brilliant.
And I think we're really talking about things that are really important that investors should consider and questions that come up. And Sonia, maybe if you could talk a little bit about the most common questions that investors have, because I think sometimes, right, if they don't have status in the US, we're very fortunate to have you in South Africa, right? But if we didn't, a lot of times, they would hope to maybe see us once a year, right? And so the trust and the track record and those things become very important. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about, some of the main concerns that investors express to you while they're first starting the process of looking into EB-5.
Yes, so I think first and foremost, it takes time for an investor to really decide, okay, now I'm going to do EB-5. And at the end of the day, if you end up waiting too long and you could have spent, let's say, 15 million, and you're like, okay, I don't know when to press the go button. But, by the time you do decide, because it is a huge, big step, you end up paying, your EB-5 funds might be 18 million or 20 million for your 800,000 investment. So I think at the end of the day, the question comes to, when do I start? and how long does it take? So I think if we could say, and I think Ed will back me up on this, start as soon as you can, because at least get your paperwork, rolling, because that also takes time. And then certain investors want to reach the US within their own time frames. And I mean, that's something, again, that is a discussion between the immigration attorney, Edward Beshara, and say, look, let's try and do this in such a way that I only want to be in the US, let's say, in 2 years' time, or how quickly can we do this? And Ed mentioned this earlier, under the new Integrity Act, that if you're in the United States, you can shorten that period. So I think the two questions are, when do we go and actually proceed? The lengthy process would be get your documentation in place, because Ed will tell you it really takes some time to build the case. And, your source of funds is probably crucial in terms of proving, to US citizenship and immigration that it came from a legitimate source. Now, if this was money that wasn't gifted, or if this was money that's not through a loan, and you have to go back 20 years, or if it was inherited money, yes, that could be an easier process. But, the source of funds, you really have to work really closely with your immigration attorney. As you know, that's the immigration side. And the immigration attorney will also need the regional center documentation. So, yes, I mean, while the immigration attorney is building your case, for instance, Ed, at least you've gone through all the documentation, you've been advised adequately, you know exactly what is in your subscription agreements. And, things like getting your unabridged birth certificates and marriage certificates, those things take time. So, yes, the answer would be start the process. And depending on your timeline, you could work very closely, with Ed and his firm, and they can advise you accordingly.
And I think it's also important to keep an open perspective, right, Ed? Because, really things change from a day to day, and not just in our personal lives, they change all the time. But if you look at the world, things change as well. I mean,
yeah.
you could get hit by a devaluation from one day to the next, and now EB-5 is going to be 40 times more expensive, or unforeseen immigration policies can happen. And we've seen that happen from year to year since we've been involved in EB-5.
Right. Well, so, I think that the foreign national needs to be aware of the process, right? If they say, look, I want to invest in an EB-5 regional center program, we can prepare and file their EB-5 petition, the 526E petition. It usually will take a couple of years at least before that petition is approved. And in the meantime, if they want to be able to travel in and out of the US as a visitor, they can. But they'll have to wait for that petition to be approved first if they want to apply for their conditional residency for themselves, spouse, and children at the US consulate. In the meantime, they don't want to stay in the US. They just want to go in and out as visitors. But for those people that have made a decision that they want to just visit the US, they just want to be students in the US, they're already here in the United States as a non-immigrant, because to be in the US as a non-immigrant, you have the intent to stay for a short period, then return to your home country, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Australia, whether it's China, anywhere, India. But the time of entry into the US with a temporary visa, visitor visa, student visa, their intent 100% has to be to come in as a non-immigrant, stay for that short period of stay, when they finish their studies, for example, then go back home. Now, there is a law that is allowing adjustment of status. There's a law that allows it, which means, and interpreting that law, that subsequent to your entry into the US, and this is a state of mind, subsequent to your entry into the US, you now have developed a new intent, not just to come in as a non-immigrant, but subsequent to your entry, you've developed this intent that you want to stay in the US. Based upon these set of facts, 100%, you can then file your EB-5 petition and concurrently file your application for permanent residency for yourself, spouse, and children. So that's subsequent to your entry. If you say to anyone as a foreign national, I intend to file my EB-5 petition and I intend to apply for the permanent residency while I'm in the US, and you're saying this and you're not in the US, and then I say, I'm going to come in as a non-immigrant student, you can't do that. You know, we can't agree to that as an immigration council. We cannot agree to someone coming in as a non-immigrant and then with the intent that once they get here, they can apply for residency. Can't do that. That's a contradiction, right, of intent. So a lot of people can take advantage of the new RIA law, file their EB-5 petition, and while they are in the US in a non-immigrant status, their entry was 100% to come in as a non-immigrant. Subsequent to their entry, then they can file their application for adjustment. That's the new law. It allows it, and it also includes the Chinese and Indians who are investing in the set-asides for rural areas, infrastructure areas, or areas of high unemployment. Immediately they can do that. They don't have to wait.
So Ed, maybe if you could talk a little bit about the power of that, because what that allows is that you're also able to get permission to work and travel while your application's in play. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because that is a complete game changer to how the program was actually structured previously.
Yeah, well, a lot of people that are coming in, with this wealth, want to further their business opportunities in the US. And to further their business opportunities in the US, from, an investment standpoint, they say, well, look, we want to open up a business. We want to do business. We want to be employed by some of the people we know and further our business careers. You can do that. Right now, as we said before, to invest in your own business, right, compared to investing in an EB-5 regional center business, investing in one's own business and complying with what's required by the immigration laws is far more expensive than investing in an EB-5 regional center project. There are ways of getting a green card or non-immigrant visas by investing in your own business. You can set up a business where you're investing money in the business. You have to show that there's going to be employees, that there's going to be business activity. These are not just business requirements, but immigration requirements. If you want to do an intra-company transfer, you have a big business in your home country, you want to set up a subsidiary in the US, to justify your entry into the US as a non-immigrant intra-company transferee executive or giving it a green card that way, you have to hire high-level managers. You have to have revenue. You have to have a location, business activity. So investing in other businesses in the US that you create, as an example, if that's what you want to do, come and live in the US and do business, to do it according to the immigration requirements, it's going to be expensive, very expensive. But comparing it to EB-5 regional center investments, it's less expensive to go right into the EB-5 regional center program, less expensive. And then once you, as Sonia and Manuel, we've been talking about, if you are here and you say, look, I want to do an EB-5 investment and apply at the same time concurrently for the conditional residency and employment and for travel, now that you're getting an employment card, you can invest in a business, do what you need to do to run your own business opportunity, work for someone without the huge restrictions and requirements of the immigration process of getting residency through an investment in your own business. So by having that employment card, it frees oneself to do what they really want to do in a normal business sense.
Yes, and I think from a regular business sense, you're talking about a passive investment, which is EB-5, versus an active investment in some of these other visa categories that you actually have to be involved in the business. And Sonia, you come across investors all the time that are looking at all of these other visa options. What are some of the common ones that you're actually hearing?
Okay, so the common one is L1, exactly what Ed was saying. And I feel that there's a lot of misguided advice that's been given to a lot of people that think, you know what, I'm going to do an L1. I'm going to open up a branch of my business. It's going to be so easy. It's going to be cheap. And Ed and I were just chatting just before the webinar today. And I actually personally know somebody that's gone over on L1, hasn't even been there 2 years. Things have not worked out the way it was anticipated. And they're going to have to be coming back to South Africa at the end of the year, which is very sad. And I mean, if you take the amount of money spent on doing that exercise, it's gone. It's gone. So, you know, EB-5 would have been the better way for them to go, you know, in the first place. And I think if they were given the proper guidance and proper immigration advice, I think this could have been avoided, because right now they've got to start from scratch again, you know, if they want to enter into the United States. Their children were at school. Now they have to leave their friends and everything they know. They've got to come back to this country, you know, and integrate back into the schooling system. So the L1 for me is probably not the worst choice, depending on what you want to do. But if it is for your family, it's for your family, L1's not going to be the right one for you.
Yeah.
Right, Ed?
Yeah, we've represented clients over the years and 40 years under the L1, E2s. You know, L1 is intra-company transfer. And basically, it's a choice. You know, if people want to do the L1, okay, it's their choice. If they want to spend the money, it's their choice. If they feel as though, well, they don't really have complete control over the parent company in their own country, there are other people making choices that they want to establish an operation. Well, then basically that's a choice that they're making. But if the foreign parent company wants to establish an operation, they may really need to study that having that individual that wants to come to the US to set up this US subsidiary or operation, cheaper to go EB-5, get that employment authorization, set up this US subsidiary, but not having to worry about the expenditure in that business to hire high-level managers, not worry about the fact that it has to be a viable business activity, right, which may take a lot of expenditure in that first year or second year, right? But also, if a family has children, and they can do these other things like the L1 to, you know, EB1C to get a green card, but the cheapest way is do EB-5 regional centers. But if you look at the amount of investment, one set amount, that's it, one set amount to go into an EB-5 regional center project. And then especially if they're in the US and then they adjust according to how we stated before, and now they're applying for the green card, employment authorization, permission to travel. You think about the fact if they have children and the children are teenagers wanting to go to university in the US, the cost of being a foreign student going to college in the US is substantial. Substantial.
Yeah.
And if you're a resident of the US and you are a pending resident of the US and you are in a particular state and you reside in that state, the fact that you're applying for conditional residency and obtaining conditional residency, and once the children are of college age, the savings would be substantial, right? And that's one factor, that children now can go to school and college, especially if you have 2 or 3 or 4 children, at a reduced rate, as if they are, you know, going to save all that money, which is true. And then the other advantage is that once your children or students, who also could be EB-5 investors too, but once the students graduate by being a resident of the US through the EB-5 program, they can find jobs. Because if you're a foreign student and then you're trying to find a job afterwards, yes, you have maybe a year or 2 under practical training, which is permitted as a foreign student. But then the employer is going to have to find a ways and means of hiring you and going through an immigration process, which could be lengthy. So you have more of an opportunity to be employed after you graduate if you are a resident of the US, and especially getting that through the cheapest way, which is the EB-5 Regional Center Program.
And that is priceless, right? Because I've had numerous conversations with ultra high net worth EB-5 investors who look at the cost perspective of an international student and say, well, I can absorb that cost. That doesn't really matter. And that's true. Okay, great. For some people, okay. But when your child is about to graduate and now they're depending on an H-1B, look at the approval numbers for an H-1B last year. I mean, what was it, 700,000 applications and 14% approval or something like that, right? It's not very high, and you're limiting yourself to only be able to work in what you studied. And so you're dealing with such a narrow job pool that it's going to be very hard for that child to be able to find a job. Because, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's a lottery.
Yeah, but you
Yeah.
don't want to, you have your children go through that headache. You want to be able to have a plan of action. You know, you want to be able to say, look, I'm coming to the US now. The economy's great right now for investing in real estate or investing in wealth management products. There's a ways and means at the least cost of getting residency for myself and the rest of the family. I don't want to worry. I'm a good business person with the right professionals helping them. Well, then let's make it enjoyable for the person to come to the US. But again, unfortunately, there are a lot of bad actors in the US. The secret is get with good actors, a good EB-5 Regional Center program like FPP, get with good professionals that can help them make that transition.
And speaking of transitions, that's a great transition to this next point, right? Because the explanation of who are the players, right? You have the regional center, you might have the developer or sponsor, and then you have the immigration attorney, and everybody's going to play a different role in this, right? And so, from the regional center perspective, for all intents and purposes, we're an EB-5 capital firm that's providing capital to a developer or sponsor for a particular project. We prefer to do debt, although EB-5 can also be equity, but we found that debt is more conservative. We have a 100% track record in investors obtaining their permanent green card because we're conservative and we usually stick to that. But that's our role, is administering the investment on behalf of the investors. But for the immigration attorney, can you talk a little bit about your role in this, Ed?
Yeah, again, we are approached every day by foreign nationals that want to invest in an EB-5 program, because I've been doing this for 31 years, right? And we've, back 31 years ago, I'm not going to give my age away, but, 31 years ago, we would travel, internationally and, with FPP and, and the staff and Bob and, we've traveled to China back in those days and, everywhere. So, the role of the immigration attorney is to say, we're going to give you immigration advice, right? You want to invest in an EB-5 program. We're saying that if you invest with FPP, from an immigration perspective, you're making an investment at risk. You want to look at the offering documents to see when there can be legally a return of capital, right? The offering documents that you sign will dictate when the return of capital can be. You're investing in a stable, viable EB-5 regional center project like FPP, and they're saying to you when they can be a return of capital, as Manuel, as you just said, and Sonia, that it could be a loan model where they're making an investment in a new commercial enterprise, and that new commercial enterprise makes a loan to the job creating entity. The loan agreement will say, look, we guarantee that we're going to see a return of capital, and after so many years, and we can extend that return based upon, the viability of the project. So all this is spelled out. So as an immigration counselor, we can say, from an immigration perspective, this is what to expect. We would ask, what is the track record, as you said, of the return of capital to investors in the past? How many of the investors obtained their residency based upon their investment in an FPP project, as an example? So that's the immigration perspective. But when they make a decision to invest from a investment business viability standpoint, that's an independent decision that they have to make. But Manuel and Sonia, you're presenting documents to them of your project, number one, to show that there's been due diligence on the viability of the project. There's a business plan. There's an economic report to show how the money's going to be used, how the money's going to be used to create jobs. Yes, it's an immigration requirement, but also from a business standpoint, if the money is used from bank loans for construction expenditures, how those jobs are going to be created and how the investors are going to be able to come in and get credit for those previously created jobs, right? So there's two paths: an investment path in making an independent investment decision, but also an immigration path as well.
Hey, Ed, talk a little bit about the jobs, because I think one of the big misconceptions out there when investors are first looking at EB-5 is, okay, I need to create 10 jobs. But that doesn't mean that you're going out and you're counting 10 individual workers that are there. It could, but it's more measured on the economic impact of the cost of the project in that particular area for that particular type of asset class. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about that formula.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I think that a lot of people think, gee, now I'm going to be one of 20 investors, and each investor has to create 10 jobs. And usually a job has to be by a person who is either a US citizen or permanent resident, if it's a direct job. But the USCIS has allowed certain economic methodologies to be used to show job creation if it's under the umbrella of the project of a regional center. And regional center means it's not a building, it's not a center. A regional center designation means a company has that license called a regional center. In that region, in that center, there's job creation, economic activity. So under this umbrella of this license, the USCIS has said, look, you can calculate jobs through these economic methodology calculations, right? And show that the jobs are created with a combination of direct jobs, indirect jobs, and induced jobs. And these formulas could be RIMS2, could be REDIME. These methodologies will be used by the economists to say, okay, either the EB-5 money or the traditional funds from the banks, non-EB-5, they're going to be used in construction expenditures. And based upon these economic mathematical calculations, this could create an indirect induced job count besides the direct jobs. And so immigration has accepted this economic methodology to show how the jobs are created per investor. So it's not 200 jobs, right, for 20 investors, because 10 times 20 is 200, right? It's a mathematical calculation. And the good news about that is that, as we just said before, if it's bridge funding, well, then the bank's money that's been used to create the jobs indirectly, like we just talked about, those jobs are already there, right? And especially if FBP says, look, we've already calculated the jobs, investors come to us. The advantage is that you are going to be able to get credit for those previously created jobs. It's a huge advantage.
It's a huge advantage. And I think also, like, if you plug it into that formula and the formula says, you know, you're going to create 200 jobs, direct, indirect, induced, 200 total jobs. You know, as a regional center, we typically like to have a cushion. So we know the maximum jobs that we're going to create is 200, but maybe we only take funds from 10 investors so that we only need 100 jobs, right? And then there's quite a big of 100 job cushion there. And so that's how that conservative approach from an immigration perspective checks the box from an immigration risk, right? As investors, you want to conduct your due diligence both on immigration and on the business case for the investment. Then does the investment actually make sense? And if you look at our project, the Talos project, just real estate in general, hospitality in the area where it's located in the Coachella Valley, there were about 14,000 hotel rooms in the Coachella Valley in 2003. If you look at 2022, still about 14,000. And so there was not any new hospitality construction there, you know, really in about 20 years. And a specific asset like the one that we have there, there hasn't been that type of construction in the last 40 years. Well, what's happened since the pandemic? Demand has increased in the area. People started connecting with nature because they wanted to be outside. And so, you know, we feel we have a really good advantage of really a first mover advantage in the area for this type of a product there. And to your point, which you just made, Ed, is that, you know, jobs are already created because the project started construction last year. Those jobs don't go away. And so I think from an investor perspective, the important thing is that what does change, and what can change are just the global macro factors, or life just happens, right? And so it's important to just move as quickly as possible because things can change from one day to the next.
Yeah, and then especially if you have that cushion, when they're able to file their petition to remove the conditions of the conditional residency, they want to be able to show that through data that the project provides is that jobs have been created. That's the main, and then the investment, of course, has been sustained according to the offering documents, right? So again, I think that, it's a combination of an immigration decision that the foreign national investor has to make and an investment decision, right? Because to get their green card, ultimately, they have to make sure the project is viable enough to continue to exist, to be able to provide evidence of job creation and showing that, of course, they want to see a return of capital.
Right. And I think what's important, Sonia, and the things that we always talk about as well as we wrap up here as well, is that this also becomes a very important family decision, right? If you think about it, the reason EB-5 is so near and dear to my heart is because I'm an immigrant as well. I had my family come over from Spain, and my grandfather flipped a coin with his brother. My grandfather won. He had a 50% chance to win, and he came to the U.S., right? With EB-5, if you choose a capital firm with the right track record, in our case, we have 100% in investors obtaining their permanent green card, you have a 100% chance, right? Because that's what our track record is, versus what my grandfather had at 50%, right? And so I think there it's really important. Study the track record, do your due diligence on a project from an immigration perspective, because you could have a very good project from an immigration perspective, but it might not be a good investment decision. And I think sometimes people get really involved in these taglines and really what are more just marketing gimmicks that come out of, hey, you're going to be able to do this extremely quickly. You're going to be able to do this. There are no shortcuts, I think, here. And I think the most important, clear thing you can do is just rely on the track record.
And I think Sonia would agree. The whole idea is to care for the investor. The investor is paramount, right? Yes, we're running a business. FPP is running a business, right? We're running a business as the immigration attorney. But for all of us doing this for so long, and we are from different backgrounds. I have an Australian accent, but I have law degrees from Australia, law degrees from the US. Sonia has an accent, right? So, but the secret is to enjoy life. For the person to enjoy the US, coming to the US, we want to care. They need to also realize that we're going to provide all the right professionals, the right guidance. And caring about the foreign national investor is paramount, is the most important thing.
Thank you, Ed. That's a great thing. Yes. Yeah. And Sonia, would you like to add any closing statements?
Yeah. So talking about being an immigrant, Ed his family's originally from Australia. Manuel's family, they're also a family of immigrants. And even myself, my baby, my youngest son, he's a South African. He's an immigrant. He's a US citizen now. So I think all three of us sitting around this forum today have an immigration aspect personally. I'm personally invested with anybody that wants to go to the US. I mean, my son I offer my son, which is not always the best thing, but, when they're wanting somewhere to live or somebody to talk to, especially he's in university, what kind of advice can he give us as a family? So we do get personally involved, which is always really the human aspect. We want to take care of people. And I think my closing remarks today, I was talking about the Reform and Integrity Act. I just want to close in saying that, you've got to make sure that the regional center, if you're going to be working through one, is USCIS approved. I mean, everyone at FPP as well, had to do our filing under compliance. We are also USCIS, approved. So make sure that if you are engaging with anybody, if it's an agent or whatever it is, make sure that the entity and the people are compliant in terms of the Reform and Integrity Act. And then just lastly, I wanted to say that, yes, everybody must just be sure that, and it's a point I made earlier, just be sure that they are applying under the right visa category if they choose not to go EB-5. And I think the EB-5 discussion has to happen, for each family, regardless, whether your choice is another visa category or not, so that you can make an informed decision. So, yes, I just want to end by saying that, as Ed always says, the only assured way to a green card is EB-5. And that's my closing remark for today. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much. Ed, would you like to give any closing remarks?
Well, for example, I always say, and I've said this for years, the last word in self-help is help, right? Which in other words means that the foreign national should get our help in advising them, right? Getting them on the right track. And if someone wants to pursue EB-5, it's one of the best ways of getting residency, and it's one of the most assured ways of getting residency. Less headaches, achieve your goals and enjoy the process of that happening. And by the way, once you get a conditional green card, the date you get it, you count 5 years, and then you can apply for US citizenship.
Thank you so much, Ed. Great to have you both with us here today. Really appreciate everybody joining us. Please reach out if you have any questions, and please stay tuned because we'll have another one with Ed sometime soon as well. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Manuel. Bye-bye.